My name is Ellery Quinn, and for 15 years, I was the definition of a loyal employee. I was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. My childhood was simple, quiet: Saturday hikes, church potlucks, and the constant sound of cicadas humming through long summer evenings. My mother was a nurse, my father a mechanic, and from them, I inherited a deep sense of integrity and work ethic. I believed if you did right by people, put in the time, and stayed loyal, you'd be rewarded in return. But what I didn't know back then, and what I learned the hard way, is that loyalty means nothing to people who treat you like a tool instead of a human being. I started working at Roth and Calhoun Media Group when I was 24. Fresh out of Appalachian State University with a degree in communications and zero experience, I applied for a junior account assistant position at their Denver, Colorado office on a whim. To my surprise, I got it. I packed up my used Honda Civic, said goodbye to my parents, and drove cross-country with nothing but a duffel bag, a second-hand laptop, and blind optimism. At the time, Roth & Calhoun was considered a boutique marketing firm with a stellar reputation for edgy campaigns and big-name clients. Their Denver office, perched in a glass tower downtown, had floor-to-ceiling windows and cold brew on tap. It felt like something out of a magazine. On my first day, I wore a navy blue skirt suit I bought from a thrift store. Everyone else was in jeans and sneakers. I was a nobody, but I worked like hell to become somebody. I stayed late, came in early, volunteered for the assignments no one wanted. I was the queen of yes. Need someone to fix a pitch deck at 3 a.m.? I was your girl. Have to charm a snobby client over golf even though you've never held a club in your life? That was me. Slowly, I earned my place. By my 6th year, I was managing major accounts for Fortune 500 companies. By year 10, I was the firm's most successful senior account executive, with over $80 million in client revenue under my belt. I had no husband, no children, just the job. My entire identity was wrapped in Roth and Calhoun. I was proud of that. Until the day it all started to crumble. It began subtly. The kinds of changes that don't seem like red flags at first, just adjustments, maybe even oversight. Our longtime CEO, Melinda Roth, retired. I'd always liked her. She was tough but fair. If you did your job well, she respected you, man or woman. She sent me handwritten notes after major pitch wins. She knew my name. Hell, she knew my dog's name. She was replaced by Dawson Reed, the chief strategy officer turned golden boy. Dawson was in his early 40s, polished like a politician, with sun-kissed hair, veneers too white to be real, and a cologne that smelled expensive and predatory. He shook my hand on his first day, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "So you're the famous Ellery Quinn. I've been hearing your name since I got here." I smiled politely. Something about his tone made my skin crawl. Over the next 6 months, I noticed patterns. My budget was trimmed for no clear reason. The creative team I worked with, my team, was reassigned. I wasn't included in strategic planning sessions anymore. Then came the kicker: I was put on a performance improvement plan, or PIP, which in corporate speak basically means we're going to find a way to fire you. My direct supervisor, a man I trained myself, sat across from me in a glass-walled meeting room and said, "We've noticed a decline in your client engagement energy, Ellery." Client engagement energy. I was floored. "My last 2 campaigns beat revenue projections by 30%, I replied, voice calm, but my stomach clenched. He didn't meet my eyes. It's not about numbers. It's about leadership style. Translation: I was being edged out, and they were going to make it look like it was my fault. I went home that night and stared at my ceiling. I hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years. I'd missed my best friend's wedding because a client needed a rebranding strategy during Labor Day weekend. I'd covered for colleagues on maternity leave, mentored every intern that walked through the door, and never once filed a complaint. And now, I was being handed a pink slip wrapped in HR jargon? Something didn't add up. So I started paying attention. That's when I noticed Fiona Marks. She was new, joined the firm about 3 months after Dawson became CEO. Fiona had the look: platinum blonde hair, perfect makeup, tight designer clothes that screamed Instagram influencer at Coachella. But she had no marketing background. No real-world experience. Just a resume full of fluff and a LinkedIn filled with duck-lip selfies and inspirational quotes. And yet, within 2 months, she was promoted to Director of Strategic Outreach, a role that didn't even exist before. She wasn't subtle either. She floated around the office like she owned it. Dawson started dropping by her glass-walled office for meetings that went on for hours. They started showing up to work events together. Her expense reports? Astronomical. Private dinners labeled as client acquisition. Weekend trips to New York marked brand research. I was no fool. I'd spent my career noticing details. I dug deeper. With the help of an IT friend in the firm who owed me a favor, I accessed internal travel logs, email headers, and Fiona's purchase history on her company credit card. What I found made my stomach turn. Over $120,000 in fraudulent expenses tied to her card alone. 5-star hotel stays, custom jewelry, first-class airfare. Dawson approved every single one. Even worse? Emails. Dozens of them. Not the content, those were encrypted, but the frequency and timestamps told the story. Messages between Dawson and Fiona at midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., nearly every night for weeks. The clincher was a selfie, buried in a folder Fiona had forgotten to mark private on the internal drive. It showed her in lingerie on a rooftop balcony, with Dawson's unmistakable Rolex watch visible on the nightstand behind her. I sat at my desk that night, heart pounding. My fingers hovered over the mouse. This wasn't just an affair. This was corporate fraud, abuse of power, and discrimination all wrapped in one. And I had the proof. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours combing through documentation, organizing a digital folder, cross-referencing dates. I made backups. Multiple copies. I printed the essentials and locked them in a safe at my apartment. The question wasn't whether I'd expose them. It was how. I knew going to HR would be a joke. Dawson had them in his pocket. He'd replaced the head of HR just 2 months prior with someone from his previous company. Any complaint I filed would disappear into a shredder. I needed leverage. I needed to play it smart. I needed to burn the house down brick by brick, not just light a match and hope the wind blew the right way. So I made a plan. First, I contacted Clarissa Green, a labor attorney in Denver I met at a women's leadership seminar the year before. She agreed to meet over coffee at a quiet cafe outside the city. I showed her everything. The emails. The expense reports. The timeline. She stared at the screen, wide-eyed. Ellery, this is gold. This is career-ending for him. Possibly jail time. I leaned back. I want to destroy him, and I want to make sure he can't quietly settle this behind closed doors. I want it public. Clarissa smiled slowly. Then we'll need to time it right. Wait for the annual shareholders meeting. Let it all come out in the open. They'll crucify him. I nodded. And until then, I'll play the good little soldier. That was the beginning of my revenge. I pretended everything was fine. I smiled. I played dumb. I took notes. And every time Dawson walked past my desk with his smug grin, I imagined the look on his face when it would all collapse around him. They thought they could fire me and bury me. What they didn't know was I was already digging their graves. The Monday after I met with Clarissa, I walked into Roth and Calhoun's Glass Fortress wearing a new blouse, fresh lipstick, and the calm, cold smile of a woman with a loaded gun tucked neatly in her purse. Not literal, of course, but I had something more dangerous: leverage. It was all about timing now. The shareholders meeting was 8 weeks away, scheduled to take place in late June at our New York City headquarters. That gave me just under 2 months to set every domino in place. I couldn't just show up with documents and scream scandal. If I wanted this to stick, if I wanted Dawson Reed, Fiona Marks, and every smug, complicit executive to go down, I had to build a story so undeniable it would collapse under its own weight. Step 1 was staying in plain sight. I made peace with my PIP. I didn't challenge it, didn't fight it. I took the meetings, filled out the forms, nodded in HR's face like a trained seal. Let them believe they had me cornered. In reality, I spent every spare minute building a digital war chest. I began documenting everything, every off-the-record comment, every policy violation, every inappropriate email Fiona sent to the staff. She was careless. She once forwarded an entire vendor proposal to her personal email and asked a friend to make it sexy for presentation. The vendor was a known Roth and Calhoun partner, and the email clearly violated our confidentiality clause. I saved a screenshot. Dawson wasn't much better. During one meeting, he sloppily referenced an executive bonus trip to Aruba that never showed up on the official calendar. I flagged the company credit card transactions and discovered nearly $18,000 billed to a luxury resort under wellness programming. Guess who attended? Fiona. Alone. The deeper I dug, the more rot I uncovered. It was no longer just about me being fired, it was about a culture of corruption. And I was the one woman willing to shine a flashlight into its darkest corners. Meanwhile, Clarissa connected me with a whistleblower advocacy group that helped protect my identity as I collected evidence. She also advised I build a timeline, meticulous, factual, impossible to disprove. I did just that. It spanned 5 years of expense fraud, favoritism, and backroom deals. I organized everything into folders: affair evidence, financial misconduct, HR complaints, ignored whistleblower protections, discrimination patterns, employee testimonies. Confidential, yes, I even had testimonies. Step 2 of my plan was recruiting allies. I started with people I trusted, those who had been quietly suffering under Dawson's regime. The first was Raina, a brilliant black woman on the design team who was consistently passed over for promotions in favor of Fiona's friends. We met for drinks one night at a dive bar outside Denver. I laid out my theory, shared just enough proof to convince her I wasn't bluffing. Raina leaned back, eyes wide. "You're seriously going after Dawson? You're not afraid?" "Terrified," I said. "But I'm doing it anyway." She finished her beer. "Count me in. I've got stories you wouldn't believe. He told me once I was too urban to lead a pitch for a client in Atlanta." "Urban, Ellery." My jaw clenched. "We'll make sure that gets written down." Next came Daniel, a junior copywriter who once confided that Fiona sent him drunken messages at 2 a.m., critiquing his tone and calling him adorable. He was afraid to say anything. But with anonymity and a bit of courage, he gave me screenshots. Then came Layla, an admin who quietly handled Fiona's expense reports. She confirmed what I already knew: those expenses weren't just bloated, they were fraudulent. Layla had been told by the finance team to process without delay, CEO approved. Over the next 4 weeks, I built a coalition, 10 people from different departments, all with their own stories, documents, screenshots, and silent rage. None of them wanted public credit. But they were ready to help burn the house down. Meanwhile, I had to pretend everything was normal. I smiled at Fiona during morning check-ins, complimented her presentation style. She was too self-absorbed to notice the edge in my tone. Dawson occasionally dropped by my office, asked about my progress. I offered empty updates and watched the clock tick toward his judgment day. Then came a surprise I hadn't planned for. One afternoon, I was pulled into a surprise evaluation with HR and Dawson. The room smelled like stale coffee and cheap perfume. The HR director, Monica Wills, looked nervous. "We've reviewed your PIP, Ellery," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Unfortunately, we haven't seen the level of improvement expected within the time frame." As such, Dawson cut in. "We're terminating your position effective immediately." The words didn't even sting. I almost laughed. But I had to play it smart. I blinked. "I understand." Monica pushed a severance package across the table. You'll receive 8 weeks' pay and outplacement services. If you sign this release, I held up a hand. I won't be signing anything today. Dawson raised an eyebrow. That's standard procedure, Ellery. I met his gaze, calm and measured. So is not firing someone who just closed a $12 million account 2 weeks ago. But here we are. He smirked. Best of luck to you. I walked out without slamming the door. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just gathered my things, my few framed photos, my favorite mug, and the potted succulent that had survived 5 office moves, and left. But not before forwarding a final copy of my entire evidence folder to Clarissa, my encrypted drive, and a third-party reporter I'd been in quiet contact with for the past week. Let the games begin. Over the next week, I was officially unemployed, but busier than ever. Clarissa prepared the formal whistleblower complaint, addressed to Roth and Calhoun's board of directors and outside legal counsel. It detailed every accusation, backed by evidence, sworn affidavits, timelines, and signatures. She also filed a discrimination claim with the EEOC, citing wrongful termination, gender bias, and retaliation. Simultaneously, my contact at the Denver Business Journal, a seasoned journalist named Juliet Tran, confirmed receipt of my files. We met once in person, off the record. She was cautious but intrigued. If what you've given me is true, she said, flipping through the binder, this could shake up the entire firm. That's the plan. She smirked. It's going to be messy. I shrugged. Messy is fine. I've got time. The real storm hit during the shareholders' meeting, 2 weeks later. I didn't attend in person, but Clarissa did, as my legal representative. We'd timed everything perfectly. Just minutes after Dawson took the podium to deliver his bright and shiny State of the Company address, a red-faced board member interrupted the presentation. They had received the whistleblower complaint in full that morning. Legal had confirmed the allegations were serious and verifiable. Within the hour, Dawson was removed from the stage. The meeting adjourned in chaos. 2 hours later, the firm's internal portal issued a notice, effective immediately. Dawson Reed has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. An external audit team will be reviewing financial operations and HR protocols. The very next day, Juliet's article went live. Headline: Sex, Lies, and Expense Reports. Inside the scandal-rocking Roth and Calhoun media, the exposé pulled no punches. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. I was called a senior female executive with over a decade of experience, wrongfully terminated, and instrumental in unveiling a widespread pattern of misconduct. The story went viral in hours. Industry leaders commented. Clients dropped the firm. Fiona deleted all her social media. Roth and Calhoun stock plummeted. Investors demanded a leadership overhaul. And me? I sat in my Denver apartment, sipping a cup of tea, watching it all burn from the comfort of my couch. I'd spent 15 years building that company's reputation, only to be tossed aside like trash. Now, I was the one holding the match. And the fire was just getting started. I always imagined justice would feel like a triumphal chord, the final note of a symphony crashing into crescendo, clean, satisfying, done. But in real life, justice was messier. More like a low hum that reverberated through your bones long after the moment passed. The morning after the article broke, my phone was a war zone. 15 missed calls, dozens of unread texts, and emails flooding in from anonymous burner accounts, former coworkers, and even former clients. Some were congratulatory, thank yous from people who never had the voice or position to speak out. Some were panicked, asking if I had really meant to go nuclear. A few were threats. I took screenshots and sent them to Clarissa. She called me before noon. They're in total crisis mode, she said, no greeting. The board's launched a third-party investigation. And my source inside tells me Fiona has already lawyered up. I pressed the phone to my ear, curled up on my couch in sweats with my laptop still open to Juliet's article. What about Dawson? Keeping quiet, which isn't like him. likely hoping to reach a quiet settlement. "He won't get it," I said flatly. "Not from me." Clarissa chuckled. "No, he won't. I already declined their informal mediation offer on your behalf." "They're scared." "They should be." I looked around my quiet Denver apartment, plants by the window, a half-empty bottle of wine on the kitchen island, a stack of business books I hadn't touched in months. I should feel better than I do. "You just set off a corporate nuke, Ellery. It's normal to feel off balance." She wasn't wrong. Even with the victory unfolding, I felt disoriented. My entire adult life had been structured around Roth and Calhoun. Morning meetings. Strategy calls. Leading branding campaigns, mentoring new hires, prepping for quarterly pitches. I had lived and breathed that world for 15 years. And then, in one calculated act, I'd severed myself from it forever. I stared at my laptop screen again. Juliet had updated her article to include reactions from key clients who were re-evaluating partnerships. A few industry watchdog groups were now digging into Fiona's past firms and finding patterns of similar favoritism and financial oddities. Apparently, Roth and Calhoun hadn't been her first playground. I closed the tab and leaned back, letting it all wash over me. I had wanted justice. But what I was getting was power. Over the next week, the ripple effects kept coming. Roth and Calhoun's East Coast office issued a memo about temporary executive restructuring. Fiona's face was scrubbed from the company website. Dawson hadn't been formally fired yet, but rumors swirled that he was negotiating an exit package to avoid formal charges. There were also whispers of possible SEC involvement due to creative bookkeeping practices involving offshore marketing accounts. The company I once knew was unraveling thread by thread. And I wasn't the only one watching. A few days later, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Marcia Langley, CEO of a boutique brand strategy firm called Langley & Price, based in Chicago. I'd crossed paths with her at a conference years ago but never spoken more than a few words to her. "Hi Ellery. Read the piece. I've admired your work from afar for years. If you're open to it, I'd love to chat about opportunities. My team could use someone with your fire." I stared at her message for a long time. Not because I didn't want to respond, but because it was the first time in weeks I'd felt seen as more than a whistleblower. More than a headline. As a professional. As a leader. As myself. I replied. We scheduled a Zoom call for the following afternoon. I wore a blazer and mascara for the first time since my firing and tried to remember what it felt like to be a professional again. Marcia appeared on screen, all sharp cheekbones and silver hair, with a smile that didn't feel rehearsed. "I won't ask you to relive the entire situation," she said after brief pleasantries. "You've done enough talking. I just want you to know I think what you did was brave. And rare." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the lump forming in my throat. "More importantly, I think it shows exactly the kind of strategic mind we need. We're growing fast, especially in health tech and ESG branding. I need someone who can build systems, who can command a room, shape narratives, and protect integrity. Not just pitch buzzwords." "Sounds like a dream." She smiled again. "Could be. Would you be open to visiting our Chicago office? Just to feel the culture?" I nodded, heart racing. "Absolutely." As we ended the call, I sat back and stared at the screen. Was it possible that the very thing designed to break me was turning into my breakthrough? In the days before my flight to Chicago, I continued to get messages. A former junior designer from Roth and Calhoun emailed me anonymously. I never told anyone, but Fiona once asked me to delete timestamps from a presentation to make it look like she created the layout. "It was yours. I'm sorry I didn't speak up." Another message came from an exec at a rival agency. "We always wondered how your firm kept landing city contracts despite your smaller outreach division. Thanks for confirming what we suspected." But one message chilled me. It was from a private email. No subject line. No greeting. You think this is over? It's not. Watch your back. I forwarded it to Clarissa. She called within minutes. Likely scare tactics. We're filing a restraining notice request and alerting to proper channels. Do you think they'd actually try something? Probably not. But we'll take precautions. I also hired a security firm to scrub your personal data from public search sites. You'll get a report in 2 days. This was the price of war. Even righteous war. Still, I was undeterred. 2 days later, I flew to Chicago. Langley and Price's office was everything Roth and Calhoun used to be before greed and ego hollowed it out. Open spaces. Collaborative teams. Actual laughter in the hallways. I sat in on a creative team's presentation and was stunned at how different the culture felt. No hierarchy barking. No buzzword fluff. Just ideas, passion, respect. Marcia later walked me through the office herself. You know, she said as we strolled past their client success pod, we've had a dozen people apply for strategy director in the past 3 months. All qualified. But none had what you showed the world. And what's that? She stopped walking. Courage with precision. You didn't just go public. You built a case. You structured a narrative. You knew the system's weaknesses and exploited them with surgical force. That's the strategist I want on my team. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I wasn't used to praise. Especially not for something so calculated. I'll send a formal offer next week, she added. Salary, stock options, relocation stipend if needed. I was speechless. Not because I didn't think I was worth it, but because for the first time in months, I was being seen for more than what was done to me. I flew home that evening, high on possibility. But the victory lap didn't last long. A week later, Clarissa called with an update. The audit findings from Roth and Calhoun just got leaked. I opened the file she sent. It was a preliminary internal memo. The audit had uncovered over $600,000 in undocumented retreat expenses over 3 years, 3 unreported personal relationships between executives and subordinates, at least 9 HR complaints that had been buried or deleted, and most damning, misuse of city and state grant funds earmarked for public outreach programs. I read the final paragraph 3 times. Due to the serious nature of the findings, the firm will initiate a full executive purge and cooperate with federal investigators. Federal investigators. I sat in stunned silence. Ellery, Clarissa said, voice sober. They may ask for your testimony. Not just for employment hearings, for criminal investigations. Are you prepared for that? I think so, I whispered. They're building a case for fraud. And potentially wire fraud if they can trace any electronic misuse of client funds. Suddenly, it wasn't just corporate karma. It was criminal exposure. Will I be safe? Yes. You followed every legal channel. You're protected. But emotionally, brace yourself. This isn't over. I thanked her, then hung up and stared out the window. My mind raced back to the countless nights I stayed late at Roth and Calhoun, fixing other people's messes, cleaning up after Dawson's tantrums, covering for Fiona's laziness. I had held that place up on my shoulders like Atlas. And they had tried to destroy me. Now, the full weight of their sins was crashing back down. The following morning, CNBC picked up the story. 2 former executives arrested. 1 under investigation for fraud. Roth and Calhoun's Denver branch shut down temporarily. Fiona was photographed leaving her Manhattan apartment in tears, no comment given. That same day, I received my official offer from Langley and Price. It included a 6-figure salary, equity options, and a bonus clause based on brand performance. At the bottom of the offer letter, Marcia had handwritten a note, "Welcome to the team, Ellery. We don't just rebuild brands here, we honor the people who make them." I closed the document, tears in my eyes. Not because I was sad. But because for the first time in my professional life, I felt free. Not loyal. Not owned. Free. There's a strange silence that follows survival, a space between crisis and stability where you're supposed to feel relief, but all you really feel is disoriented. That's where I lived for the first few weeks in Chicago. Langley and Price moved fast. They relocated me into a sleek temporary apartment downtown, just 10 minutes from their River North headquarters. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows, an assistant I didn't have to train, and a team that actually respected my leadership. On paper, I had everything I'd fought for. But reality had other ideas. On my first day in the office, I was greeted with warm smiles, fresh flowers, and an introductory lunch with the senior team. We talked strategy, Q4 planning, and key accounts that needed creative overhauls. Marcia even pulled me aside at the end and said, "You're exactly what we needed. Keep shaking things up." It should have been perfect. And for the first week, it was. Then the whispers started. Nothing overt. Nothing direct. Just a few glances during team huddles. Some muttered comments when I passed in the hallway. A design lead who abruptly withdrew from a joint project with no explanation. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe people were intimidated. Maybe they'd read Juliet's article and felt uncomfortable with my very public revenge arc. Maybe they didn't know how to work alongside someone who'd torched an entire company on the national stage. But the truth was uglier. By week 3, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was questions. Did you really record Fiona without her knowledge? I heard you kept a file on the whole executive team. Is that true? Is it safe working with you, or are you the type to bury people if they make a mistake? I stared at the junior copywriter who asked that last one. She was barely 24, fresh out of grad school, and she wasn't being malicious. She was just afraid. I didn't answer. Not then. Instead, I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the skyline, feeling like the storm I had survived had followed me. They didn't see me as Ellery Quinn, respected strategist and fixer of broken brands. They saw me as a walking grenade. The real blow came 2 days later. I was reviewing campaign concepts for a health tech rebrand when Marcia knocked lightly on my door. She looked somber. "Got a minute?" Of course. I pushed my laptop aside and stood to greet her. She shut the door behind her and didn't sit. "I need to ask you something, and I want your full honesty." My stomach tightened. "We received an anonymous tip from a former Roth and Calhoun employee," she said. "They claim you weren't just a whistleblower, that you were involved in some of the gray accounting yourself. That you padded campaign budgets to gain internal leverage." I blinked, stunned. "What?" "I don't believe it," she said quickly. "But our legal counsel needs to investigate. Standard protocol." I swallowed. "That's a complete lie." "I know. But unfortunately, now we're part of the fallout. Someone's trying to drag you back into the mud." "Do you know who sent the tip?" Marcia hesitated. "They signed it anonymously. But our IT team traced the email's IP address." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. The IP was registered to a private residence in Cherry Creek, Colorado. My chest turned cold. Cherry Creek was where Dawson lived. Clarissa confirmed it within hours. "He's trying to flip the narrative," she said over the phone. Classic gaslight maneuver. Discredit the accuser, muddy the waters, make people question your credibility. "But I didn't do anything wrong," I snapped. "He knows I didn't. He doesn't care. He's drowning. And drowning men pull others down." I stood on my tiny Chicago balcony, watching traffic snake below. What do I do? Keep your receipts. Forward all documentation. And do not, under any circumstances, engage with him directly. I won't. But I wanted to. I wanted to scream at him. To drive back to Denver, knock on his pretentious glass condo, and throw every shred of evidence in his smug face. I had protected him for years. Hidden his incompetence. smoothed over his failures. And now this? He was trying to smear me. But the truth? It wasn't just professional retaliation. It was personal. Because deep down, I knew Dawson hadn't forgiven me for revealing the affair. Not just with Fiona, but with the other woman. The one no one knew about. Not even Fiona. I hadn't planned to tell anyone. But that night, I opened a secure call with Juliet Moreno, the journalist who had first exposed Roth and Calhoun. "I need to add to the record," I said. Juliet raised an eyebrow. "You want to go public again?" "Off the record for now. But yes, eventually. I think it's time people knew the full scope." And so I told her. About how, 6 months before the board fired me, I discovered Dawson was embezzling not just money, but influence. He had been manipulating the outcomes of major city contracts by promising favors to political consultants. One of those consultants was his ex-girlfriend, now a campaign strategist for a rising state Senate candidate. She had been feeding Roth and Calhoun privileged information, insider details about public RFPs, budgets, committee leanings. In exchange, Dawson had funneled sponsorship money to her candidate's private foundation. Money disguised as marketing outreach. It wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. I had found the documentation, emails, transaction records, falsified invoices. And I had buried it. Back then, I told myself it wasn't the right time. That going public would get me fired, and then nothing would change. So I waited. But now, the gloves were off. "Juliet," I said, voice steady. "If I give you everything, can you get it in front of the right people?" She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Over the next 48 hours, I forwarded the entire secondary dossier, an archive of everything Dawson thought I'd deleted. I also sent copies to Clarissa, to the SEC tip line, and to a trusted former city contracts lawyer who had once warned me, "If you ever need a whistle blown, call me first." And then I waited. Again. But this time, the wait was shorter. Juliet published her second exposé 3 days later. The headline was brutal: "From boardroom to backroom, how Dawson Sharp used political connections to rig public contracts." The article exploded across LinkedIn, Reddit, even political blogs. Suddenly, it wasn't just about office affairs or corporate dysfunction. It was about corruption. And this time, I wasn't alone in my anger. The next morning, I arrived at Langley and Price to find my team waiting. They stood, one by one, as I entered the glass conference room. No judgment. Just respect. The same junior copywriter who had asked if I'd bury people handed me a coffee. "I read the article," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for doubting you." "Thank you," I replied, throat tight. Marcia arrived moments later, smiling warmly. "Legal's cleared your name. You did everything by the book." Relief flooded me. But even more than that, validation. For the first time since Chicago, I felt like I could breathe. But as I celebrated that small victory, one final blow came through the grapevine. A mutual friend from Denver forwarded me a local news clip. Dawson had been arrested. Charged with campaign finance fraud and conspiracy to rig city contracts. He had been taken into custody at a restaurant, stunned and silent, his lawyer issuing a vague no comment to reporters. I watched the footage twice. I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. But I felt freedom. I had spent 15 years building a career in someone else's empire, playing by someone else's rules, protecting people who didn't deserve my loyalty. Now? I was finally building something for me. My story was no longer about revenge. It was about rebirth. And I was just getting started. Reputation is a delicate thing, easy to damage, slow to repair. But in the right hands, it can become armor. And for the first time in a long time, I felt armored. The fallout from Juliet's second exposé was nuclear. In the span of 3 days, the name Dawson Sharp went from rising executive power to walking scandal. Political watchdog groups latched onto the story, and a mid-level senator who had taken donations from Dawson's contact quietly withdrew from re-election. Calls came in from reporters, ethics committees, even a congressional subcommittee on campaign corruption. Juliet had ignited something bigger than either of us expected. And while Dawson's world burned, mine flourished. Langley and Price promoted me from senior strategist to executive creative director in just under 4 months. Clients who had once hesitated because of my controversial past now wanted to work with the woman who had exposed a corporate empire. But peace is never permanent. Not when politics are involved. It started with a package. Unmarked. Delivered to my office by a local courier with no return label. My assistant, Grace, handed it to me with a raised eyebrow. "Kind of sketchy," she said. "Want me to run it through security?" "No. I've got it." I waited until she left the room before slicing open the thick manila envelope. Inside, a printed dossier, stapled and dog-eared. On the front page, my name, bolded and underlined. Underneath, subject of interest, federal inquiry into improper disclosure of political documents. My heart dropped. I flipped through page after page, photocopies of the files I had shared with Juliet, redacted versions of internal emails from Roth and Calhoun, and an annotated timeline of every campaign Dawson's ex-girlfriend had worked on. It read like an opposition research file. And on the final page, a post-it note scrawled in blue ink. "You've made enemies beyond advertising. Don't be naive enough to think they'll stop at Dawson." There was no signature. Just a symbol in the corner, a small circle with a triangle inside it. I recognized it. Barely. It was the insignia for AmeriCorps Strategies, the political consulting firm Dawson's ex had worked for, and the same one now under investigation for campaign finance fraud. They were scared. And they wanted to scare me back. That night, I met Clarissa at a rooftop wine bar in Fulton Market. She wore a trench coat and sunglasses, like a spy out of an old noir film. "This isn't funny," I hissed, sliding the envelope across the table. She glanced through the contents and exhaled slowly. "They're fishing. They want to rattle you, make you back off." Well, it worked. Clarissa looked up. "Ellery, you are not responsible for their downfall. You gave the truth to a journalist. You didn't break laws, you exposed people who did. They're saying I mishandled political documents. They'll say anything. You're a liability to people who built empires on lies. That means you're doing something right." Her words steadied me. But it wasn't until he showed up that I truly understood how deep this went. 3 days later, I received a LinkedIn message from a name I hadn't seen in years. Caleb Rowan. Once the VP of accounts at Roth and Calhoun, Caleb had left abruptly 3 years prior. Rumor was he got in a fistfight with Dawson at an off-site retreat in Breckenridge. He disappeared from the industry after that, no updates, no press, no LinkedIn posts. Just gone. Until now. Caleb Rowan, you probably don't want to hear from me. But I have something you need to see. It's about AmeriCorps. And Dawson's real leverage. Can we meet? I stared at the message, uncertain. Caleb had always been intense. Brilliant, but with an edge. He was the only executive who ever questioned Dawson publicly, and the only one Dawson couldn't intimidate. They had clashed constantly. Now I wondered if that fight in Breckenridge had been more than just ego. I replied with a time and place, Sunday 10 a.m., Riverwalk Cafe in downtown Chicago. He arrived 10 minutes early. Still tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with gray now. He wore a leather jacket and carried a brown envelope under one arm. "Ellery," he said, nodding like we were old friends instead of ex-colleagues with shared trauma. "Caleb. Why now?" He didn't waste time. "I know about the folder. The one they sent you. And I know why they're doing it." "Because I blew the whistle?" "No. Because they think you have something you don't." I frowned. "What?" "Leverage. A USB drive Dawson used to store off-books campaign data. It disappeared the night before your article dropped. My blood ran cold. I've never seen a USB drive. I know. That's why this is dangerous. Someone thinks you have it, and they want it back. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside, surveillance photos. One of me entering Langley and Price. One of me leaving my apartment. One of me jogging along the lake. This is real, Ellery. They're watching you. I looked up, fear creeping into my voice. Why are you helping me? He hesitated. And then he said something I wasn't ready for. Because I was the one who gave Juliet the initial tip about Roth and Calhoun. I stared at him. What? I saw what was happening. I knew Dawson was laundering influence. But I didn't have the stomach to go public. So I passed the info anonymously, and waited for someone brave enough to finish the job. You should have told me, I whispered. I'm telling you now. Over the next hour, Caleb laid out everything he knew: names, companies, paper trails. He'd been building a case in the shadows, too afraid to act alone but too angry to walk away. And now that Dawson had fallen, the real wolves were circling. We can't do this piece by piece, I said finally. We need to go big. Burn it all down. Caleb nodded. I'm in. Whatever you need. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. That week, we reassembled a team, quietly, carefully. Clarissa handled legal coordination. Caleb reached out to his old contacts. I spoke with Juliet about a third article, one that wouldn't just expose corruption, but name names in both parties. Langley and Price backed me. Marcia even offered private legal counsel. But with every move forward, the pressure increased. I got another envelope, this time with photos of my family. My sister's kids. My mother's home in Colorado Springs. The message was clear. Stop digging. But we didn't. Because the more they threatened us, the more certain I became that we were close. They wanted silence. We were going to give them headlines instead. When you go to war with power, you expect bullets from the front. You don't expect to be stabbed from behind. Caleb and I were careful. Meticulous, even. Every drive we used was air-gapped. Every meeting was face-to-face, phones powered down and batteries removed. Clarissa coordinated with an ethics law firm in D.C. under assumed aliases. Juliet had moved her research to an encrypted server, accessed only from one specific device inside a rented basement workspace in Wicker Park. For a while, we felt like ghosts. Untouchable. Until we realized ghosts can still be hunted. And sometimes, they're hunted by their own. The weeks after Caleb and I reconnected were a blur of connections, documents, late-night planning sessions, and cautious optimism. What we were building wasn't just another exposé. This was a full-scale detonation, a precise and devastating reveal that would show how AmeriCorps had funneled tens of millions of dollars through shell LLCs tied to both sides of the aisle. There were fake nonprofits. Straw donors. Even a whistleblower inside AmeriCorps' data division who had promised to testify under the condition of anonymity. We were days away from finalizing everything. That's when the surveillance stopped being subtle. I noticed it first on a Monday evening as I left Langley and Price. A dark blue Chrysler Pacifica idling near the curb. Same one I'd seen the night before when I left my gym. Same cracked front plate. I turned my phone off and looped 3 city blocks before catching the driver watching me in his mirror. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I called Caleb and met him at the warehouse unit we'd been using as our secure document center. He was already there when I arrived, pacing, wired. They're on to us, I said as I entered. He nodded grimly. I know. And then, he dropped the bomb. Juliet's gone silent. Hasn't responded in 2 days. Her office says she took emergency leave, but her phone's been wiped. What? I felt my stomach knot. She wouldn't just disappear. Not now. I think someone got to her. The next 72 hours were chaos. We called in every favor, rerouted every server backup, and tried to confirm that Juliet was safe. When she finally resurfaced, via a burner number and encrypted voice call, her voice was low and unsteady. "I'm okay. But someone broke into my apartment. Took my laptop. I'm in a safe house in Milwaukee, off-grid. I can't come back in. I'm sorry." She hung up before I could even ask where she was. The line went dead. Juliet was out. And without her, our article, our proof, was missing a critical voice. But worse than the silence was what we found next. Caleb called me 2 days later, voice tight. "You need to get down here. Now." He'd gone back to our document warehouse to pull copies of the whistleblower contracts and the transfer logs from AmeriCorps' internal donation funnel. But when I arrived, I found him standing in the middle of the unit, the storage boxes wide open and empty. The hard drives, gone. The folders, scattered, many ripped open, some burned. It looked like someone had set a small fire and put it out halfway through. But not just anyone. Because there was no sign of a break-in. No forced entry. Nothing on the cameras we'd installed, except one 30-second clip we hadn't noticed before. It showed someone entering with a keycard. One of ours. Clarissa's. I didn't want to believe it. She had stood by me from the beginning. She'd risked her name to help rebuild my career. She'd connected me to Langley and Price, vouched for me during the worst of the media storm, and even arranged for the original legal contacts when Dawson retaliated. But facts don't lie. The keycard number matched hers. And the timestamp on the security system was exactly 35 minutes before the files were destroyed. We confronted her the next day, Caleb and I both. She didn't deny it. Her voice was quiet. Almost regretful. "They came to me, Ellery," she said, sitting in the corner of her living room, legs folded under her like a child. "2 men. Said they knew about my past. About the sealed court case from Houston." Caleb looked stunned. "What case?" "Embezzlement. 10 years ago. It was dropped, sealed, but not forgotten. They said they'd make sure it resurfaced, go public, destroy my license, drag my family through it." "You could have told us," I said, my voice flat. "I wanted to. But it was too late by the time I realized what I'd given them." She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and slid it across the coffee table. "I copied everything before they made me burn the rest. It's not all of it, but it's something. I didn't touch it." "Do you even know who they were working for?" She shook her head. "Just said they were with AmeriCorps interests. One of them mentioned a senator's name. James Fenton." I felt bile rise in my throat. Senator Fenton was a senior appropriations chair, publicly clean, quietly powerful, and one of Dawson's biggest mentors during the Roth and Calhoun years. Caleb stood abruptly. "We need to go. Now. Take the drive, Ellery." I picked it up, numb. I didn't say goodbye to Clarissa. I couldn't. Back at Caleb's condo, we went through the drive line by line. It wasn't everything, but it was enough, at least to buy us time. The files included internal AmeriCorps emails referencing contingency accounts tied to Shell nonprofits, memos from Senator Fenton's office scheduling private meetings with major corporate donors, a list of PACs that had been flagged for money laundering, then quietly dropped from the investigation, and one more thing, a document labeled Harbor Protocol. It detailed a kill switch program used by AmeriCorps to scrub data, blacklist internal whistleblowers, and falsify logs in case of audit. "Jesus," I whispered. They were preparing for this for years. Caleb stared at the screen, jaw clenched. "We need to move. Before someone else does." We called Juliet. Told her what we had. She promised to help us publish it, but from afar. "I'll do one more piece," she said. "But you'll have to be the face this time, Ellery. I can't protect you anymore." I agreed. Because I'd already decided. This time, I didn't want protection. I wanted exposure. 2 weeks later, Juliet's third article hit every major political and financial news outlet in the country. The Harbor Protocol, inside the political laundering machine behind AmeriCorps. It exploded like a grenade. 3 senators issued statements. 2 stepped down from committee leadership. And 1, Senator Fenton, was subpoenaed by a federal grand jury. But while the public cheered and the headlines rolled, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because someone inside my own circle had sold us out. And as much as Clarissa had cried and begged, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the only one. The morning after Juliet's explosive article went live, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Every notification felt like a lightning strike, messages from journalists, activists, former colleagues, and strangers. But beneath the surface of support, a darker storm was brewing. By noon, it became clear, the media frenzy had turned. No longer was I a victim of corporate treachery or a whistleblower hero. I was now the story. A target. At first, it was subtle. Anonymous posts on social media painting me as an opportunist. Fake accounts accusing me of fabricating evidence. Whispers that the secret affair was a ploy to destroy innocent lives. And then, the lies got personal. An obscure tabloid ran a hit piece, Ellery Dane, fired for performance issues, not corruption claims. I was portrayed as a disgruntled employee with a history of conflicts, painted as unstable and unreliable. It hurt. Deeply. Especially because some of the attacks felt too precise. Not just aimed to discredit me, but to cut my support from within. I called Caleb. We need to figure out who's orchestrating this. It's coordinated, professional. He agreed and contacted a private investigator friend from his college days. Within 48 hours, we got a lead, someone close. My mind raced as I reviewed every conversation, every meeting. Who could it be? Clarissa? No, she had already betrayed us once, and I doubted she had the nerve to continue. Caleb? Impossible. He was the most loyal person I knew. But what about Langley and Price? The firm had been a refuge for me, the place where I was rebuilding my career. But it was also the place where the final betrayal was coming. It came in the form of a text from an unknown number: "You're making powerful enemies. Stop now, or we make sure your career is over for good." No signature. I showed the text to Caleb. We can't back down. Not now. He was right. If I retreated, everything we'd fought for would be lost. The next day, I sat down with Clarissa again. We needed answers. She was nervous, avoiding eye contact. Finally, she confessed. There was someone within Langley and Price, a senior partner with deep political connections. They had been feeding misinformation to the press, aiming to isolate me. Shock hit me like a punch. Not only had I been betrayed once, but now the walls around me were closing in. Caleb and I launched our own quiet investigation, cross-referencing emails, phone logs, and security footage. And then we found it. A deleted email thread. From Daniel Cole, a partner at Langley and Price. He'd been in secret contact with AmeriCorps lobbyists for months. Daniel had arranged leaks, timed to hit right after our public exposé. He had orchestrated the smear campaign. And worst of all, he was someone I had trusted. Confronting him was brutal. In a private meeting, I laid out the evidence. He smiled coldly. You're naive if you think anyone in this game plays fair. I reminded him that justice was about more than power. You'll regret crossing me, he warned. But I was no longer afraid. I told Caleb, it's time to end this. No more shadows. Together, we prepared our final move, public exposure of Daniel's betrayal, paired with the evidence of AmeriCorps' corruption. The day we released the dossier, the media exploded again. Daniel Cole was suspended pending an internal investigation. Langley and Price's board launched a full audit. And Senator Fenton faced increasing pressure. It wasn't perfect justice. The scars of betrayal ran deep. But I had one. I wasn't just the woman fired after 15 years of loyalty. I was the woman who survived. After the storm of revelations, betrayals, and battles, the dust began to settle. But healing from the upheaval was anything but simple. I found myself at a crossroads, not just in my career, but in my life. The media frenzy that had once threatened to consume me gradually transformed into cautious respect. Journalists who had doubted me before now sought my insights on corporate ethics and whistleblowing. Invitations to speak at industry events started pouring in. My name, once dragged through the mud, was slowly becoming synonymous with courage and resilience. Langley and Price moved quickly to distance themselves from Daniel Cole. His suspension became permanent after an internal investigation revealed layers of unethical dealings not only with AmeriCorps lobbyists but also with several other corporate clients. The firm promised sweeping reforms, new ethics training, and a commitment to transparency. Caleb and I found solace in the victory, but we knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The corporate world was a battlefield filled with shifting alliances and hidden agendas. Still, standing side by side, we began planning our next moves, determined to build something sustainable from the rubble. One afternoon, as we reviewed proposals for a consultancy focused on corporate compliance and ethics, I received a call from an unexpected source, Senator Fenton's office. The senator, now under intense public scrutiny, was looking for a way to make amends. She proposed working together on new legislation to crack down on corporate corruption and protect whistleblowers. I hesitated at first. Years of betrayal had left me cautious, but I saw an opportunity to create lasting change. With a renewed sense of purpose, I accepted. I wasn't just a victim or a whistleblower anymore. I was a catalyst. Moving forward, I launched a consulting firm dedicated to helping companies implement ethical policies and protect their employees from the kind of corruption I had exposed. My mission was clear: ensure no one else would endure what I had been through. Though the scars of betrayal lingered, I learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding pain but facing it head-on and transforming it into power. Looking back, I realized that being fired after 15 years of loyalty was the catalyst for everything: the pain, the struggle, and ultimately, the rebirth. My story wasn't just about revenge or exposing secrets. It was about reclaiming my voice. And finally, it was about justice. Ellery Dane, signing off on this chapter, but ready for whatever comes next. Thank you for following my journey.